Pamela Winters had dressed modestly for her first excursion into Stragview. The warden had a very specific task in mind, and he had promised her double her usual rate if she could get results. She presented her credentials at the gate, and after a trip through the metal detector and a thorough search of her belongings, she was told to proceed to the warden's office. She doubted that visitors were usually allowed to bring in implements for brewing tea, but her brother had likely given them special orders to let her through with whatever she needed to get his information. She had chosen one of her more modest pantsuits, and she was still aware of the eyes on her as she passed the orderlies working in the hallway. She imagined that most of them hadn't seen anyone like her in a while, but the attention was less than flattering. She didn't have to guess which door was his. It was printed in large, gaudy letters across the front of the pebbled glass window. He had always had a flair for dramatic presentation, and his current form was far from low profile. She imagined that the warden of Stragview played a part in many of the inmates' nightmares. She knocked and was told to enter, the man in the pinstripe suit looking smugly over the top of his cup as he drank. She made a face as the smell of Earl Grey hit her in full. When it came to tea, it seemed he had less refined tastes. "So nice of you to finally join us," he said, smiling at her through the steam of his cup. "We can't all work through the holidays like you, dear brother." He cocked a leg on his knee, studying her through the rising condensation that had turned his glasses steamy. "Sorry, prisons never close. Holidays are just another day for us. I trust you've been having fun in your little den amongst the sheep." "Pleasantries were never your strong suit," Pamela said as she took a seat across from him. "Let's get down to business. What do you want?" The warden shook his head and tutted a little. "You've lived in the shadow of my prison for so many years, and yet you never came to say hello or have a chat with me. Some people might think you were trying to avoid me." "Smart people would," Winter said icily. "Now what do you want?" The warden sat back, still wearing that Cheshire Cat's grin as he sipped his tea. "I have a problem I seem incapable of brute-forcing my way through." "Subtlety was ever your speed, though I imagine it's easier to find brutes in a place like this," Winter quipped, taking a species of smug satisfaction from his need to ask for help. The warden, however, chose to ignore her attempts at needling him. "There is an object of power loose in my prison. Well, there are several, actually, but this one is the most troubling at the moment." "And why is that?" "Oh, some capricious god has decided to mess with me, very likely. Happens more than you would—" No, I mean, why is this one more dangerous than the others?" At that, her brother seemed uncomfortable. "That's not relevant to your questions," the warden said, a little too quickly for Winter's liking. "Am I at least allowed to know what it is that I'm looking for?" The warden seemed to give this some serious thought before agreeing to some breadcrumbs. "It's a small stone idol. That's all you need to know." Winter wanted to tell him that was far from all she needed to know, but decided to leave it at that. Her brother was not his usual self, and that spoke volumes about this thing he was looking for. He was fidgety and unsure of himself in a way that he was trying very hard to hide. Winter hadn't seen him in close to 1,000 years, and this was the first time that she had seen him like this. Her brother was never the type to rely on brute force, and generally relied on plans within plans. In that respect, he was more like their father, and that sort of intrigue was ultimately the reason that she had left home. He had changed very little in that respect, and it ultimately reminded her that, at the end of the day, All he sought was their father's acceptance, something he was unlikely to ever find. "Do you have a place where I can set up?" As it happened, he did. Winter settled herself in a little room where inmates met with their attorneys, and he sent one of his guards, Ingram by the stitching on his shirt, to go retrieve the inmate in question. As he stood in the doorway, fidgeting and walking around nervously, she brewed her tea and made herself comfortable. As the smell of winter cherry and ginseng cascaded over him, he smirked, also picking up the baser elements and understanding the nature of the brew. "Just like our mother. You always believed that the answers could be found in the stomach. And just like our father, you always believed that you could find what you lack in intrigue, rather than honest discussion." That shut him up, and she was glad. He had always been a nasty know-it-all, who was never content to know less than those around him. As the man came in a few minutes later, Winter could tell that he'd been touched by something dark. He looked as if he had aged rapidly, shrinking to nearly a toddler's size. His skin hung on him like an old man, and his eyes were dull and listless. She wasn't going to get much out of this one. Not from his mouth, anyway. She was going to have to go in and take the knowledge that she needed, something she hated to do. "What's his name?" The warden looked surprised. "What? His name? What is his name?" He looked at the guard who had brought the man in, and Ingram gravelled out that the man's name was Dryer. "Very well, Mr. Dryer, I'm going to help you get some of that out of your head. Just relax. I'm not going to hurt you. It's best if you drink a little of this," she said as she pressed the cup to his lips. "Lean forward and let me work." Without a word, the man did lean forward and sipped from the offered cup. It was as if he was eager to have whatever was in his mind out too. Winter reached forward, placing her hands on his head, and let her fingertips sink into the bald, flaky scalp. Officer Ingram gasped as her fingers slipped through the skin, reaching for the mace on his belt with a shaky hand. "Warden, she can't," the guard started, but the warden told him to go have a smoke break, and he would call him when they needed him. As the door closed, the warden rolled his hand lazily at her, indicating her to proceed. Winter nodded, closing her eyes as she got to work. He had found it on the rec yard. Some inmates like to exercise during rec. Some of them like to play sports. Some of them just like to walk around and enjoy the fresh air. Nathan Dryer liked to dig. He had liked to dig since he was a child, and it was something that followed him into adulthood. He had gone from building sandcastles and little construction sites to digging holes to inspect bugs or things he found with his metal detector. His metal detector was actually what had brought him here in the first place, and when he had been found digging up bullet fragments on federal property, they had arrested him and hit him with 5 years for trespassing. Nathan was just trying to do his time so he could get back to the real world, but Stagview was about to impose itself on him in a way that he could never expect. Nathan had learned pretty quickly not to dig very deep. As Yard Sergeant Bailey had informed him, he was doing something that could be seen as an escape attempt. So Nathan never dug very deep, and he was always careful never to dig near the fence. He was also careful to fill in his holes when he was done. That way the people playing sports didn't trip in them. Neither would the guards doing a rec yard check later that night, which would almost be worse. The last thing he wanted was an additional charge for assaulting staff by having them trip in one of his holes. So, there he was, digging around near the north side of the walking track as he looked for bugs and worms, and just marveling at the wet red clay that he found there. He had been told that this was where they started the mines that were supposed to lay under Stagview, but he had never seen them. No one to his knowledge had ever seen the mines. They had been closed in the 60s after a pretty nasty accident. Nathan wished they were still open. That sounded like the perfect job for him. He could just go down into the earth for 12 hours and dig till his heart was content. "Playing in the dirt again, eh, Dryer?" Dryer ignored Lance as he attempted to get under his skin. He was one of those guys that like to pick on people, and the weirder the hobby, the more he picked. He seemed to take the fact that Nathan liked to dig as a personal insult. He probably saw picking on him as a way to get him to stop, but if that had worked, Nathan would have stopped digging in the 4th grade. "Maybe you can dig yourself up some friends," Lance said as Nathan went right on ignoring him. He heard it when the large man took a step in his direction, but he had already committed to not interacting with him. If there was one thing Nathan hated worse than weird hobbies, it was being ignored. "Hey, freak, I'm talking to you. Clean the dirt out of your ears." Nathan leaned down a little, his finger having brushed something hard and rough. He wanted to know what it was, maybe a cool rock or a beetle, but as Lance got closer, Nathan thought he might not have a chance to get at it. He was saved from further harassment by the yard sergeant calling an end to wreck. Dryer buried his hole again and went to line up with the others, Lance bumping him as he jogged past. Dryer gritted his teeth, wanting to say something nasty back to him, but stopping himself. He had no friends, no gang to help him, and he was practically alone. As Nathan got in line to go back to the dorms, he wished he could dig up some friends, as Lance had suggested. Then maybe he wouldn't be so alone. He had started to walk back in, but he stopped suddenly and looked back at the spot where he'd been digging. Something was calling to him from there, something that really wanted him to go back to digging. As the sergeant yelled at him to hurry up, Nathan started walking again, committing that spot to memory so he could go back there next time. A couple of days later, Nathan was back on the rec yard, digging in the dirt again. He was keeping a wary eye out this time, not wanting to get harassed by Lance again, but he refused to stop what brought him joy. He had a good feeling about this spot, the same spot he'd been digging in the other day, and he wondered if it would be a bug or a rock or maybe a coin or something that someone had lost out here ages ago. There was a gross-looking soap dish in his locker that the officers never bothered to open during searches, and that was where he kept his treasures. There was a long gold fleck in there that he'd found by the pavilion, a dime from 1963, and the remains of a stag beetle that had burrowed down into the clay. They were the closest thing he had to treasures, and he guarded them jealously. "Looks like Dig Dug's at it again," came a familiar voice from behind him. Dryer sighed. Lance had found him earlier than expected. He had started to say something back, but winced as his finger came into contact with something hard, and it nearly ripped his nail off. Dryer looked down to find the top of the stony object again, and as he wiggled it and pried it loose, it finally came free from the dirt. "Hey, freak, I'm talking to you," Lance yelled, clearly not liking being ignored. It was a little stone carving of a screaming face, and despite being horrific, Nathan couldn't look away. It was so strange to find something like this, so unique, so unthought of. "When I talk to you, you respond to me, freak. I'm sick of getting the cold shoulder from someone like..." But Lance had seen the idol now, and it stopped him in his tracks. He had a hand resting on Nathan's shoulder, but the fingers that usually dug into his skin were loose and uncoordinated. Nathan looked and saw that Lance was looking at the idol, and he clearly liked what he saw. The guy had been walking with a skinny trustee named Worthy, and he was asking him what it was as he came over to have a look. Suddenly, two speechless people were standing over him, looking at the carving with reverence. "Wow, Dryer, that's a cool little thing you found there," Lance half whispered. "Yeah," Worthy said. "Think we could have a look?" Nathan was shocked at their change in demeanor, and was eager to bring the carving over to the sitting area under the pavilion. He set it on the table, telling them they could look, but they weren't to touch. The two sat quietly like children in a museum, and looked at the fabulous carving for quite a while. Dryer was amazed at how quickly they had come under its spell, but to his further amazement, others came to join them. By the time rec was over, Nathan had a group of 8 inmates standing around and looking at the little idol. When he went to line up for his dorm, he was surprised to see that the 8 from the pavilion came to stand beside him. They followed him all the way to the dorm, like ducks behind their mother, and when they got back to the day room, he set the idol down on the table and watched them marvel at it. It attracted others too, catching their eye as they went to watch TV or play cards, and soon the table wasn't big enough to hold them all. That seemed to be when the dorm officer took notice, and Dryer thought the jig might be up when Officer Wellerman came waddling onto the floor. Wailerman to the residents of E-Dorm, was a big-bellied guard who seemed to enjoy lording what little power he had over his charges. He had some weak-chinned TA in there with him tonight, which meant they'd have to suffer him being on the floor more than usual. Wellerman didn't think people who couldn't carry gas had a place on the floor, and as he came towards their little gathering, he had an ear-to-ear grin for them. "Evening, gentlemen. What you got there? Some kind of bug, or maybe some drugs that I need to—" He stopped talking when he saw the idol, and the grin slipped right off his face. He pushed in between a couple of the gawkers and just stared at it as it sat on the table. He was amazed by the little statue, his eyes as wide as a child's on Christmas morning. Whatever power the idol held over him was working overtime if it had managed to net a fat fish like Wellerman. As Nathan watched him, he began to realize that they could use this to their advantage. He just wasn't sure how much power this thing had over the officer yet. "Officer Wellerman?" he asked, leaning down a little. "Do you like my little friend there?" "Yeah," the officer practically whispered. "Wouldn't you like to bring him a little gift? It would make him very happy." Wellerman nodded, his chin's wobbling. "First, invite your ward down here to have a look. Then listen very carefully." Wellerman tossed the Hershey bar on a Dryer's bed the next night during master roster count, to the amazement of those in the dorm. He had looked a little shell-shocked when he came to work that day, some distance having taken away some of the idol's power. Not all, apparently, as the candy bar on his bed would attest. He had looked at Dryer strangely when he'd come to work, clearly feeling the pull of the idol, and he wasn't alone. Dryer's life had changed for the better in the last 24 hours. Now he had a small legion of followers that seemed to hang on his every word. They gave him extra food, they let him use the TV, and they hassled people who refused to fall in line. That was becoming a minority in the dorm, to be sure. His little flock from the day before had doubled, and Nathan was living the high life. He was the king of this brood for the most part, and now that Wellerman had proven to be under the idol's sway, he knew he could go further. "You should have asked for something bigger," Lance hissed, sitting back when Wellerman spun and glared at him. He waited till the guard had gone to the other wing before hissing, "Pack of smokes or something." Dryer fixed him with a look, taking the idol out of his front pocket so Lance could see it. "Are you questioning my authority?" Lance looked angry for half a breath, but as the idol came into view, all his anger seemed to melt away. People seemed to listen to him when the idol was out where they could look at it, but once it was out of sight, they seemed to forget that they had decided to follow him. The idol held some power, but Nathan wasn't sure how far he wanted to push that power just yet. He had started with a candy bar, thinking that it might be the easiest way to test it. It wasn't technically against the rules to bring inmates candy, but it would be considered a real bitch move to do so. They likely figured he meant to eat it himself, and as the wrapper came off and Dryer took that first savory bite, he relished the taste of milk chocolate. They got candy here, but it was usually old or slightly melted. It had been 3 years since Nathan had eaten a real, unmelted chocolate bar, and he savored every bite of it. Watching the gathering parishioners, their tongues sliding over greedy lips, Nathan knew he would have to rig up something so that they could see the idol at all times. A necklace, perhaps. As they sat behind the rec-yard shed a few days later, smoking Wellerman's latest gift, Dryer felt better than he had in a long time. He was wearing fresh clothes, clean underwear, new socks, and smoking a cigarette for the first time in years. His stomach was full for a change, and he had slept better than he had since going in. He had friends to talk to, instead of just the bugs that squirmed in the yard. He knew they weren't really his friends, not like the few he had had on the outside. They laughed at his jokes, and they shared their food with him, but he couldn't ignore the way that their eyes tracked the swing of the idol as it hung around his neck. He was careful to put it in his shirt when he wasn't around his friends, and so far no one had marked the string or seen the bulge in his shirt. Well, someone had. Someone he was about to regret getting mixed up with. Nathan coughed, suddenly racked with a series of railed gasps. That had been happening more and more lately, and yesterday he had spat a tooth into the sink as well. He wasn't sure why, but he had to think it had something to do with the idol. Maybe it was taking his energy in order to give him the gifts that he was receiving. Well, coughs and a few teeth were a small price to pay for the ability to sway others, and Nathan would give up all his teeth if it meant that he could spend his last year and a half in safety and comfort. The coughing was the reason that he noticed them at all. Nathan saw them as they approached, but he just figured they wanted to bum a smoke. He had used the idol to befriend the guard in the rec building, and he knew that no one would bother them, except for other inmates. There were 4 of them, all of them sporting long sleeves in the early fall heat. He had seen them around lately, keeping their heads together as they conspired, and most people thought they were some kind of new gang that was trying to form. It happened sometimes. Gangs came and went, but the old guard still remained in the end. As they approached, it was clear that they knew who he was, and likely suspected he was trying to form a gang of his own. "Greetings," said the head of the group, an older guy with a greasy ponytail and little gold glasses. "Would you mind if we had a word?" Nathan couldn't think of any reason why not, so he sent a few of his followers away. He kept a few of the bigger guys beside him, though, Lance and Gage and Michaels, just in case this was some kind of shakedown. The men he had brought with him were younger, but they were smaller. Dryer had little doubt that his 3 could whip all 4 of them if it came to it. "We understand you've found something we're looking for." Nathan furrowed his brow a little. It seemed they were getting right to the point. "You must mean this," he said, taking the idol out of his shirt. The man with the shiny tail of hair practically started drooling when he saw it, and the look was so intense that Nathan wanted to put it away before it got much worse. He'd seen something similar on the face of his newfound friends, but this look had something else in its depths. This was the look of a cancer patient who's seen a cure within easy reach. It's the way the junkie looked at a full hypo, and Dryer suddenly didn't feel very safe with just 3 guys around. The man looked as if he were contemplating murder, if it would get him that little rock figure. "We'd like to buy it from you. Name your price. We'll pay anything." Nathan did put it away then, seeing their intent. "It's not for sale. It's my most prized possession. I'd sooner sell you my left hand than this." The man smirked. "You wouldn't be the first one to make such a trade in this place." "Well, if you won't sell it, why not a loan? We only really need it for a little while. Then you can have it back. We'll even pay you for the trouble." Dryer thought about it, but in the end, he just couldn't stand the thought of being parted from it. He had owned it for such a short time, but the little thing meant so much to him that letting anyone else touch it seemed unthinkable. If he gave it to them, he would never see it again. He was as certain of that as he was that old One-Ear would eat his tuna packet if he left it unattended. This guy was part of something weird, maybe worse than a gang, and Nathan suddenly didn't want anything to do with him. "Afraid I'll have to pass, boys. Now head off, you're stinking up the joint." The man glowered at him a little, but then put his hands up in a placating way, and he was all smiles again. "Sorry you feel that way. We'll be going then." He left then, but Dryer doubted it was the last that he'd see of him. Suddenly, however, the idol rolled on his chest, and the woman looking in at his memories saw an eldritch glow rising in the sunken orbs. The idol held all the fires of hell, all the mysteries of creation, and as it engulfed her, it pushed her out of Nathan Dryer and back into herself. Winter came shivering up from his mind, the fingers of that faraway power feeling cold and alien as they shoved against her. The warden was beside her then, rattling questions into her ears so fast that she thought she might have whiplash. She pushed him away, trying to catch her breath so she could convey what she had seen. She hadn't seen all of it, but it was enough to show her exactly what they were dealing with. No. You didn't say we were getting involved with shit like this." "What? What was it? What did you see?" "I don't know exactly, but it's something I've heard of." "Capricious God, nothing. Someone is trying to sow real chaos in your prison. Something like this could turn the natural order on its ear." It may have already," the warden said sheepishly. Winter looked at him with horror, waiting for an explanation. The two stood for a moment, Winter staring at her brother, and the warden looking anywhere but at his sister. "Something has gained control of the idol, gained control of it about a week ago, and I need to know where it went before they use it to bring something into the prison that I can't stop." "You have to get back in there. I need to know where that thing is." Officer Ingram had returned to find Dr. Winters lying on the ground, breathing heavily and trying to get her wits about her. She had felt touched by that strange idol, even through the memories of the man hunched before her, and she just couldn't seem to get her bearings again. What the hell had that been? How had she been reached out to like that through a memory? She didn't know, but she knew that she didn't want to go back in there again. Not much scared Winter, but that thing had. "I don't have to do anything," she said, looking up at Officer Ingram as he came back and offered her something cold to drink from the commissary. "I told you where it is. My deal is fulfilled as far as I'm concerned." "No," the warden said. "I need this out of my prison. I need it found and secured before it's too late." "Why? Why would you want to possess something like that?" Winter suddenly snapped at him. "Don't you have enough gewgaws and totems and weird little trump cards at your disposal? How could you possibly think you can control something like this in the first place? This is so beyond you that it isn't even within your kin." Ingram had been hovering, and Winter realized that she hadn't even opened the drink he'd brought for her yet. It was Canada Dry, one of her favorites, and as the crisp bubbles flowed into her dry throat, she smacked her lips appreciatively. She thanked the man, his attitude having warmed to her a little, it seemed, but the warden dismissed him with a chop of his hand and told him not to come back until called. As the door closed, he looked at Winter with all his considerable weight behind that stare. "Control it? No, dear sister. I don't want to control it. I want it gone from here. You see, this prison is my personal toy box, but there are many things trapped here that are best left here. I contain them, keep them here for safety, the safety of the community, and something like this could turn them loose on Kashmir and the surrounding area." "Crap!" Winter shouted, letting her feet wobble. "Don't you dare pretend this place is built on altruism. This is a mason jar you keep bugs in, just watching as they kill each other. I've known you since the darkness of the void. Don't pretend your nature has changed in the last 100 years. The warden shrugged. "You think so little of me. There's some truth to what you say, but that doesn't mean our goals aren't on the same track. Some of the terrible things I keep here are to torment the souls of those who put themselves in my web. But some of them are here because they would unmake the world that I inhabit. Do you think I want to return to that smoldering pit any more than you do? What memories would you collect in that little book down there? No, sister. If Stragview falls, then your little den of cashmere falls as well. And I have to say that I don't like your odds. If my prison is a place to hold dangerous animals, then Cashmere is a rehabilitation facility for damaged minds. What would they do if even a few of my little boogans got loose on the town? Could you protect them from the darkness the way that I do? Winter wanted to refute him, but she couldn't. He was right. She was no great warrior. Neither was he, but he had done pretty well so far. Fine, but you have to promise me that you'll destroy this thing once we have it. It's dangerous, brother. Even you know that. If it corrupts one of us, it will never come to that, he assured her. But in order to be rid of it, I have to know where it is. Winter nodded, looking back at the placid old man sitting on the chair before her. He hadn't moved an inch in the time they'd been talking, and he looked like some grotesque doll. He was breathing, that much was true, but Winter wondered how much longer he'd be doing that, too. She had seen him in his memories as a young man, full of life and energy, but this husk that sat before them was all the more reason for them to destroy this idol. If it could do that to a human, she didn't want to imagine what it could do to someone like her or her brother. She took a seat across from Dryer and fixed her hands on either side of his head again. She fell back inside like Alice through the looking glass, and as she landed in the dorm once again, she was glad for the little time skip. Nathan knew he was in trouble, but he didn't know what to do about it. In the last week, he had brought every guard who worked this dorm under his sway, and people were starting to take notice. The bruiser who worked inside security on days, Carmichael, had come in with some of his enforcers and started asking questions. Wellerman answered them as best he could, but Wellerman was starting to slip. A lot of his guys were, and that was worrisome. The longer they stayed under the influence of the totem, and Wellerman was working double shifts sometimes just to be here, the less real they became. They were still there, but their personalities, their uniqueness began to filter out. Lance mostly just stood around and did what Dryer told him to do, but every now and again he would shake his head and look around like he wasn't quite sure what was going on. It happened a lot in the beginning with Wellerman too, but he hadn't come out in quite a while. Dryer lived in a dorm full of puppets for the most part, and that was starting to weigh on him. Not on his conscience or anything. Dryer didn't really give two figs about these hard cases. But it was a strain to orchestrate a whole dorm's worth of men every day. Dryer was getting up at 3 a.m. every day so he could gather his little flock and tell them what they were doing. Okay, listen up. When I give the signal, we all go to chow, eat our food, put our trays in the wash area, and line up outside the chow hall. Then we go back to our dorm when I give the signal again. Every part had to be given exactly, too. A couple of days ago, we had forgotten to tell them to put their trays in the slot, and they had all gotten into some trouble when they tried to take them back to the dorm. Dryer had managed to put the hoodoo on Sergeant Wise, the guy watching the chow hall that day, but it had been a near thing. After that, Dryer had started writing things down so he didn't forget them, and was sure to give orders precisely. Go to the rec yard when it's time. You 20 play baseball, you 12 walk the track, you 8 play basketball. The rest of you go sit around and talk and pretend to be socializing. When they call over the loudspeaker, go to your bunks and go to sleep. Day in and day out. That was what his life had become. He should count himself lucky, he thought sometimes. They didn't live in a work squad dorm. Then he'd have to tell 70 men how to do their job every day. Speaking of, he had to start making Wellerman go home. At first, it had been a treat to have the sergeant here for days on end. Wellerman brought them things, told them things, helped them get extra yard time and extra trips to the canteen. But he was getting to be as absent as the rest. Sergeant Carmichael had actually started coming in because of Wellerman. When the sergeant wouldn't answer his radio, he had come to check on him and his TA. He had started to send him home, but Wellerman had insisted that he was fine to stay, and Carmichael had relented. That was good, because whatever power the totem had, Carmichael was immune to it. Dreyer had tried to sway him in the beginning, thinking Carmichael would be the ultimate ally, but the burly yard sergeant had scoffed and asked him what in the hell he thought he had there. "You better make that disappear before I do, Dreyer. Next time I come looking for contraband, I better not find you with that either. I got too much going on today to fill out paperwork for taking a necklace, but I'll have all the time in the world if I decide to make it my business." After that, Dreyer had kept it put away. He coughed, and when he looked down, he saw blood again. That was getting worrisome. He didn't dare go to medical with it, but his teeth and hair had been falling out more frequently. His head was hurting too. A lot. There were times when he thought he might be hallucinating voices. The voices never told him anything nice. They never really told him anything at all. The voices sounded more like earthquakes, rumbles from deep in the earth, and the words he did get from them were terrible. He was coughing more too, coughing up red stuff, and he was beginning to really think that it was the totem. He wanted to give it up, he wanted to throw it away, but he didn't dare. He had tried a few weeks ago, and the results had been disastrous. On top of the headaches and the loss of sanity, Dreyer had started hearing things in those rumbles. First it was just a few words, but now he could understand the rumbling, roaring voices better than he could his own. They wanted him to do things that didn't make a lot of sense, and Nathan wasn't sure how much longer he could take it. So one night, as his minions just stood around and looked at the walls, he slipped the totem off and put it in his locker. He thought that being out of contact with it would stop some of the problems, and as the rumbling voice stopped and the ice pick behind his eyes ebbed, Dreyer felt like he might be at peace for the first time in a few weeks. No more voices, no more pain, but as he closed his eyes to enjoy the silence, he was in for a whole new set of problems. The screaming started about a minute after he shut his eyes. It was sudden and absolute. Everyone went from staring and existing to screaming and grabbing their heads. Fights broke out. People began running around, and as Nathan watched from his bunk, all he could think to do was reach for the necklace. As he held it up, all eyes were on him again, and order was suddenly restored. He could hear Wellerman's radio asking just what the hell was going on in his dorm, and he told the officer to give them the all clear and say it was just a momentary misunderstanding. He told everyone to go to bed after that, but as he lay there listening to the rumbles, Dreyer wasn't sure how much longer he could take this. "We heard the ruckus the other night. You sure you won't reconsider our offer?" Dreyer looked up, as confused by the intrusion as his charges seemed to be all the time. They were on the rec yard again, milling and going about the motions, and as the group approached them, Dreyer looked down and coughed. His hand was red again, and the blood was becoming more frequent. "That looks bad," the man with the ponytail said, "but I think you'd get better if you just gave us the totem. Without it around, you wouldn't have to worry anymore." Dreyer was quiet for a moment, contemplating as he tried to make his brain cells work, and he knew the man was wondering if he would respond at all. "Why would I do that?" he finally husked out. What good is it to you?" "It isn't me who wants it," the man said, and when he lifted his sleeve, Dreyer saw something carved into the skin of his arm. It was red and running, but the words Jessie were still very clear. "She tells us what she wants with this power. The power to bring this prison down, and we obey. We are followers of her wisdom and love, and we will see her will done. Dryer realized then that they were no different than him. They were being moved by something much larger than they were, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. "Go away," he said, and the men around him must have heard something in it because they started moving between Dryer and the Ponytail Man. "You won't last much longer," Ponytail said. "We'll have it, one way or another." He left again, and Dryer was forced to come to terms with the fact that the man might be right. "You look like shit, Dryer. Why don't you just tell us what this is all about?" Dryer had to admit that Carmichael was right. He did look like shit. He had 2 teeth left, a small collection of hair that would make Homer Simpson envious, but not many others, and he had shrunk an inch already. He was sitting in his boxer shorts after the 3rd dorm search they'd had that week, and Dryer was honestly tired of all this. When the goon squad came in, the whole dorm had got up as one and just walked to the day room. Dryer had been with them as he strolled listlessly at the back of the line. Carmichael had taken note of him as he passed, and as Dryer watched all their crap being piled beside their beds, he had expected this confrontation and been prepared for what he had to do. "Sure, Sarge. Why don't you take me out of the dorm so we can talk privately?" Carmichael thought about this for a moment, finally nodding as he stepped to the side and let Dryer make his way out. The two had no sooner stepped out of the dorm when the screaming started again. It didn't make Carmichael as worried as Dryer thought it should. "If I tell you, I need protection. I need to be out of this dorm and away from anyone associated with it." His voice sounded husky, like someone getting over pneumonia, but he pressed on as his mind tried to put the pieces together. "I think that can be arranged, as long as what you have to tell me is enough to warrant it." So, Dryer had spilled the whole sad story for him. He told him how he had found the idol on the rec yard. He told him how he had used it to control people. He told him how it had all been great at first, but now, between the headaches and the lack of sleep, and his body slowly dying, he was ready for it to be over. He just wanted peaceful sleep. He just wanted the rumbles to stop. And he just wanted to not be the puppet master over 70 blank slates for a while. Inside the dorm, he could hear the other members of the goon squad yelling and trying to gain order again, and he doubted he would be alone in medical if that was where he was going. Carmichael reached out a hand. "Give it to me. Give me this thing, and I promise you that I'll put you somewhere quiet where you will never be bothered again." Dryer almost wept as he slid it off his neck, handing it to Carmichael with trembling fingers. As he did, however, he noticed something high up on the man's arm. It was fresh ink, maybe a year or 2 old, but he could clearly see familiar words near the start of the man's massive bicep. The ESSE made him think that there was likely a J past the rim of his uniform sleeve, and it took all his limited control to keep his face from giving him away. If Carmichael believed that he had guessed who the sergeant was actually working for, the quiet place he would go to would likely be a hole near the fence line. Someone came out then, yelling for Carmichael to come and help. The sergeant told the officer to take this inmate to medical and get him rehoused in an ISO cell for possible TB. He said he wanted this whole dorm quarantined, and no one was to go in or come out for at least a week. Others were running up now, and as the officer took Dryer away, he saw Carmichael look at the idol and grin. He knew what he had, and he already knew what he was going to do with it. Winter came up like a diver again, shaking all over as she looked at her brother. It's a Sergeant, Carmichael, and he has the idol already." The warden nodded, lifting his radio to call someone. Winter put a hand on his arm and shook her head. "There's something else at play. Some other entity that's taking control of it." The warden cocked his head. Do tell. There were other inmates interested in it. They had marks that were similar to the markings Carmichael had. I think it was a name. A woman's name. Jessie. The warden hissed out. God damn it. What is that bitch up to now? Do you know her? Winter asked, straightening her blouse as she followed him out of the room. Unfortunately, Jessie is someone I haven't thought about in a long time, but she's someone I've been forced to remember very recently. If she's after the idol, then there's no telling what she means to do with it. Whatever it is, it's not good for Stragview, or for Kashmir. He picked up the radio then, asking for a location on Sergeant Carmichael. Dispatch was quiet for a moment, before coming back with an answer that quickened the warden's steps. He's doing a fence check, sir. His last call-in was near... A pause. G-dorm. No, wait. J-dorm. He's checking the... But the warden swore loudly and dropped the radio as he began to run. What's wrong? Winter asked, not sure what was happening. That bitch! That bitch! He screamed, pushing through the doors and almost bowling over Officer Ingram. She's playing with things she doesn't understand. Sir? Ingram asked, falling in beside him. Get some men together and come to J-dorm, he shouted. If you encounter Sergeant Carmichael, I want him taken to the tower. Immediately. What's going on? Ingram said. Is he trying to break someone out or something? The warden laughed, but there was no joy in it. Yes, as a matter of fact, he is. And if he manages it, we are all royally fucked. The warden looked at J-dorm, the haunted-looking edifice that was the death house, and sighed as if he would rather be anywhere else. Winter understood. She could think of very few places she wanted to be less than this place. He had made calls after securing the gate, giving orders that no one was to go in or out, and in 30 minutes he had 12 lean, mean fellas arrayed by the fence, with little badges that identified them as CERT team members, whatever that meant. They had empty holsters today. No weapons were allowed on the compound, outside of an emergency situation. They had the little black cans that all the officers carried, and some of them had tasers as well. It seemed a lot of effort for one man, but if he actually had what she'd seen, then she supposed they might need them. He turned away from the death house as one of the men came closer and whispered something to him, addressing the men as they stood respectfully. Even these guys, certified head knockers, knew better than to get on the wrong side of the warden of Stragview, it seemed. Gentlemen, I'm going to say this once, so listen up. A few of you have worked here before, and you know the reputation of J-dorm. But for those who don't, we're going into the eye of hell. A few of them snorted, but the 3 or 4 of them who had worked here looked scared enough to crap masonry. They knew this place, and they knew its reputation. This place hasn't been opened since the last execution at Stragview. No one has set foot in this dorm since Alex Murphy died, and it's a strange place. We're going in to get Andrew Carmichael out, and when we have him, we're going to get out as quickly as we can. Someone towards the end of the line whistled a few bars of Ghostbusters, and some of the CERT guys laughed a little under their breath. The warden rounded on him, shutting them up in short order. You think this is a joke? I lost 5 men in this building a year ago. Do not go in there thinking this is a joke. This building and the things inside will eat you alive. Stay together. Don't go off by yourself, and we'll make it out alive. Lieutenant Rogers, arrange your men, and let's get this underway. They all had flashlights, the little tactical ones that you could stick on your belt when you weren't using them, and the warden handed Winter one of the big mag lights that you so often saw on security guards in movies. It looked thick enough to bash someone's brains in with, though Winter hoped she wouldn't have to use it for that. They all proceeded in, Winter and the warden taking up the back. Lieutenant Rogers went in first, and When he reached around to flip the switch, there was nothing but a dry click and a pop as several of the lights died. The others flickered for a moment and then went dead. They were left with nothing but flashlights, and Rogers told the warden and Dr. Winters to stay here while they checked the housing area. The warden warned them again to be cautious, and they promised that they would. "So," Winter asked, "what's the deal with this place? It's not like you to be so worried about anything." The warden swung his flashlight around, looking in the corners for something and not finding it. "We did something we shouldn't have done, and now I've invited them in. We let a Trojan horse into the prison, and if it's in league with Jessie, then we might be in a lot of trouble." "Who's this Jessie? Why are you so afraid of her?" He bit his lip, another first, and seemed to contemplate how best to answer her. "About 30 years ago, I did something unadvisable. He paused, looking sheepish. "I took a lover." Winter snorted. "Oh no, God forbid. It's not something I do often. Humans are not something I like to mingle with, but this one seemed different. She seemed more like us than her own kind, and for a time, we were content. Then she began to want more. Our father's always telling us how we need to spread our wild oats among the sheep, but when she came up pregnant, suddenly there was all of this talk about marriage and child support. It didn't help that she was utterly immune to my charms. Some of them are, you know, and refused to be swayed. I was finally forced to tell her that we had no future together, and she did not take it well." Winter nodded. "I should think not. Did she get the courts involved? I think I would have heard if you had a paternity suit in the works." The warden shook his head. "No. She responded by flinging herself from the tower you passed on the way here." Winter put a hand over her mouth. "God! Over you?" The warden shrugged. "I suppose. This was back when the tower was infested with rats, too. She went in at night, and they found her on the ground inside the tower fence when the sun came up. Ever since, there have been whispers about a ghost named Jessie. She haunts the grounds. She haunts the dorms. She sows chaos from time to time, but only recently has she become a real problem. I'm a little afraid that my unborn child might have granted her some kind of otherworldly powers in the hereafter, but who's to say? There's a lot of vengeful spirits in this place, but she's the only one I have no real control over." Winter pursed her lips, digesting what he had said. "You have control over ghosts?" she asked suddenly. Ghosts were usually a little beyond them, being something different than their usual realm of expertise. "Well, it's the same way I control some of the other things that take up residence here. It's more like I give them fences and let them hunt. It's within my power to destroy them, but it benefits me to have them here. They're like zoo animals. As long as my guests don't wander into their enclosure, they don't get eaten up." Winter was horrified, but she found herself nodding as well. It made a species of sense. "So why haven't you destroyed Jessie if she's such a problem?" "Oh, I tried. More than once. She's resilient. Every time I banish her, she comes back. She's tied to this place in an unhealthy way, and I can't seem to be rid of her. So then," but the radio crackled, and Lieutenant Rogers reported that they had found nothing in the East housing area. "We're coming back to check the offices in the West housing area before we go on to the killing floor." "Copy, Lieutenant. Keep your eyes peeled for movement." Winter gave him a minute before starting again. "So then what's so special about Alex Murphy? Wasn't he that serial killer who picked up hitchhikers?" "Yes, but it was what he befriended at the mental hospital that made him so dangerous. He befriended something from outside our understanding. Winter scoffed. What's outside our understanding? The CERT team came back up the hall, flashlights out, and staying in tight formation as they proceeded north into the office area. Winter quieted until they were out of earshot, and when she looked back at her brother, he seemed to be having difficulty getting it out. "Do you remember anything Father said about the creatures from outside our reality?" Winter nodded, ticking them off on her fingers as she recalled them. The pale lady, the green man, the bright, those shadow things. "The gallery," the warden corrected. "That's what he brought in with him." Winter was shocked. I didn't actually believe any of them were real. I just thought they were Father's paranoia working overtime. "Do you mean to tell me that this gallery is real?" "Oh, they're real, all right. I've been keeping them pinned up here since they escaped during the execution. The bastard let them loose with his dying breath, and they've been trying to get into the prison ever since. These things would play merry hell inside the grounds, worse than Jesse ever could, and I like the idea of them teaming up about as much as I like the idea of Father knowing I wasn't able to contain them." Winter started to poke fun at him, but she understood. Her brother had always been the favorite, the golden child, and he didn't want Father to be disappointed in him. She wished that she could make him believe that Father's approval wasn't the most important thing there was, but she knew he wouldn't listen. He had always craved their father's attention, and he would have been the hardest of their siblings to convince that his love was not something they could obtain. She supposed they were all likely on Earth somewhere. That was the nature of their kind. But Winter had no real desire to see any of them. She was the oldest of her father's daughters, the first to leave, and she had never been very close with any of them. She would have gone right on avoiding them if her brother hadn't gone and spoiled it. "Office is clear. We're proceeding to the west housing area and the killing floor." Winter jumped a little, having forgotten about the radio, and as the warden keyed it up and acknowledged, he sighed deeply. "I was really hoping he would be in one of the cells, maybe in the office somewhere, trying to fight the urge to go to her. But I suppose I know where we would find him. We need to go with them as they proceed. I have a feeling he's made his way to the killing floor already." Winter nodded, and as the CERT team came back around, the two not-quite-humans fell in behind them. They moved with precision, though Winter doubted that this was what they had been trained for. She wondered if any of them would have to die today. She hoped not. She was tired of watching people die for things they didn't really understand. Things like the byplay of gods and the often difficult-to-understand conflict between beings outside their understanding. Most of these men likely wanted nothing more complex than to go home, eat dinner, and fall asleep in their own beds with someone they loved. Pamela wanted the same thing, though Winter doubted it would be something that could be achieved, not without some kind of conflict. The cells in the western housing area yawned open like hungry mouths as they passed up the hall. These were more like the cells people saw in movies, the deep cells that stretched into the concrete with a bed and a toilet and a metal door with a single window that looked out. The inmates would have all that room to themselves, too, and Winter bet that many of the inmates in the facility would have killed for accommodations like this. Most of those who got to live in them had done just that, she reminded herself, and as they cleared each of the cells, they proceeded to the killing floor. She hadn't felt it before now, but as she walked up that hallway, Winter felt a strange sense of being watched. The shadows around the top of the doorway looked too thick. The darkness that permeated the corners of those cells was too substantial, and Winter could feel something pressing at her. It was different from the totem that she had seen in her vision, the difference between grabbing something cold and touching a hot stove. but it still made her wince whenever that regard settled on her. Was this what her brother had feared? Was this what had terrified the warden of Stagview? She didn't know, but she suspected that it was. She felt something different as she came into the room that served as the killing floor, and that prickling felt more natural. This was the feeling of hairs rising on the back of your neck. This was how she knew something otherworldly was in there, and when the CERT team began to hesitate, Winter figured that they had found what they were looking for. "Warden, there's someone in there." The warden pushed his way through the group, Winter following in his wake. She had a front row seat for the large man in the gray uniform as he tried his best to get into what had been the little room where they put the needles in their charges. The windows in the little room were completely black, a deep midnight existing behind them, and the longer she looked, the more Winter thought it might be moving. The man by the door, that hulking bruiser with his sleeves pushed up to reveal his tattoos, was sweating and grunting as he tried to push his hand closer to the door. The idol was glowing, pulsating with a soupy light, but whatever barrier her brother had raised seemed to be holding him at bay. I can't reach it," he growled through clenched teeth, and as Winter watched, she saw a translucent figure appear behind him. The figure put her hand over his, the small and delicate fingers looking comical beside his bunched and hairy knuckles, and as she gave him her power, the hand moved a little closer to the door. This, it seemed, was the mysterious Jessie. Pamela had to admit that her brother had taste. The woman was waifish in a way that made Winter think death had not shrunk her, and her long silver hair flowed down around her like a river. She was dressed in a long blue garment that looked like it had started life as a sheet, and when she noticed them, the specter hissed at the warden as if to tell him to stay away. Lieutenant Rogers made to enter, but the warden put a hand out. "Take your men up the hall. As soon as I deal with her, I'll call you, and you can come escort Sergeant Carmichael away." "Sir, are you sure that's—" "I don't have time to argue with you. Do as I say, Lieutenant." Rogers nodded, though he seemed unsure as to why. He told his men to back up and pulled the door closed as the warden and Dr. Winters stepped onto the killing floor. Carmichael looked worried for half a heartbeat, but when she touched his face and turned him back to the door, he looked totally at peace again. Jessie, it seemed, knew how to get men to do what she wanted, and death hadn't stopped her from getting her way. "Why did you bring them if you were just going to send them out?" Winter hissed as they approached. "Witnesses," her brother breathed. "Carmichael is a normal person, and he needs normal people to bring him to justice." The meaning wasn't hard for Winter to figure out. "Jessica," the warden began. "No, you don't get to use that name. Call me what you used to call me when we were together. You created me, after all, so why not use the name you gave me before you killed me?" Winter expected him to try to deny it, but he just shrugged. "Jessie, then, whatever this is, it's over now. You know you can't stand against me. You know I'll scatter you again, and you'll be nothing but vapor until you can form again." Jessie gritted her teeth in a painful rictus. "That's true, but I know something you can't stand against. You're so afraid of them that you locked them away, or so you thought." The warden snorted, shaking his head as he walked towards the sergeant and took hold of his wrist. It broke, loud enough to echo across the small room, and he caught the totem as it fell towards the ground. And you would have gotten away with it, too, if you'd only started a little earlier. Sergeant Carmichael took a swing at him with his free hand, but the warden caught it and tossed him easily aside. He went sprawling in a heap on the concrete, breathing in little gasps as he held his wrist. He looked confused, and When Winter bent beside him and put a hand on his temple, he flinched away. "Don't," he breathed. "Don't you—" But as her hand slid into his temple, Winter was already riffling through his memories of what had happened. Jessie had gotten her hooks into him about a year ago, while she was drawing life force from some of the inmates in the prison, and it had been all too easy to bring him under her sway. He had helped her recruit more, helped her grasp the tattered ends of her former followers, and now Jessie had a cult even larger than before. As Carmichael fell, Winter heard someone cry out pitifully. She turned to find the warden pressing the ghost girl against the side of the death house, the specter twisting and writhing as he looked at Winter. "I need one more thing before our business is completed. Take her memories and leave her to drift." Winter was frozen for a moment, unsure she could even do such a thing. "Brother, spirit memories are different than human memories. Ghosts are made of memories, and I'm not even sure I can—" "Stop talking about it and come do it. This little bitch has been a thorn in my side for too long, and I'm tired of dealing with this spiteful jade." Winter thought about it. She really did. But as she watched the two together, she began to realize that her brother wasn't the only victim here. "She said you killed her," Pamela said, staring daggers at her brother as the spirit tried to rake him with phantom fingers. "What did she mean?" The warden rolled his eyes. "She would say anything to justify what she's done. She's a spiteful harpy, trying to— Did you kill her?" The warden sighed theatrically, and the sound came out more exasperated than disgusted. "I've killed lots of people, sweet sister. You've killed lots of people. We kill people sometimes. They learn what we are. They threaten to tell people. They threaten to go to people who could send us back from whence we came. So we end them. She was only going to live for a few decades. What's her life, her child's life, next to mine?" Pamela had heard enough. She turned, heading for the door. "Sister, I'll bill you. You have your rock, you have your traitor. Deal with the loose ends yourself. It's what you're best at, after all. If you leave—" But she turned and raked him with a stare. "I have completed our bargain. Now take out your own trash. Whatever check you send me better not bounce either. Otherwise I'll come back, and my collection process will make your little girlfriend's power play look like a bag of flaming shit on your doorstep." She left then. Left her brother holding his ex-lover. Left the rotten stench of Stragview behind. She had already decided to burn this pantsuit and get a new one. She'd never be able to wash the taint of this place off her. Not with 1,000 washings. He'd be back. He always came back. But she hoped it would be another century before she saw him or any of her other siblings again. Maybe she should go get some therapy, she thought with a little chuckle as she walked past the stunned members of the CERT team. Perhaps it was time to get her own closure and put the dysfunction of her own family behind her. Maybe she'd even use the money from her brother's check to pay for it. Wouldn't that just be so poetic?